Change is the only constant, and this phase couldn't be more apt in the case of technology. You go to bed thinking you've just bought yourself the latest smartphone on the market, and you wake up the next morning only to find an updated model available. Now, as you're aware, this tech craze has also hit the automotive market, and what we have here is the updated Hyundai Elantra. Now this car has got an entirely new front end, a new rear end in terms of styling, and on the inside, more importantly, it's got more technology. Now the major technological update on this Elantra is something that Hyundai calls as its BlueLink smartphone app. Now this app allows you to remotely start the car and even cool the cabin by running the air conditioning. Now unfortunately this morning it doesn't seem to be working because it always tells me that it's connecting to the server. But let's put that away, this is a car after all. So let's hop in and go for a drive. Now before we get going, let's just take a quick moment to run you through this updated cabin. Well, you get this faux carbon fiber finish on top of the cowl here in between the dials. The layout's a little bit different now because you get this new console for the HVAC controls. Some of it has faux aluminum finish in between the switchgear. It looks really nice. But what I really like here is that you have knobs for everything. So you have your volume knob, you have your fan speed knob, you have your climate control knobs. So it's all very easy and intuitive to use over here. Other handy features in here include the ventilated seats, you get your emergency call buttons from your BlueLink system, you have a sunroof, and you have an electronically adjustable driver's seat. Speaking of seats, the rear seat remains unchanged, which means you have an adequate amount of leg room and under thigh support, so the rear seat itself feels fairly comfortable and spacious. Now from the moment you set off, you do realize that the Elantra generates a fair amount of attention on the road, and that's largely because of those new angular headlamps. Well, they are all LED headlights, but what really works for them are the LED DRLs. The headlights themselves are in the shape of large triangles, so to have full LEDs of that shape, it gets a lot of attention. Everybody turns around for a second glance. So job done for Hyundai then, because all of the new angular lines really attract a lot of attention out on the road. That's your product positioning done right there. Now when it comes to me personally, well, I preferred the more sedate and subtle design lines of the pre-facelift Elantra, but you know what, I guess this works better now. Moving ahead and past its styling, you do feel a little more lively in this cabin because of the dual tone interiors, the beige upholstery, and on good days when you can keep that sunroof panel open, you know, it's a fairly airy cabin to be in. Now apart from all of these aesthetic changes, well, the Elantra is largely the same mechanically. It's powered by a 2-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated petrol engine that's good for 152 horsepower and 192 Newton meters of torque. It is mated to a 6-speed torque converter automatic gearbox, but the change here with the powertrain is that it is now BS6 compliant. What does it feel like to drive? Well, like earlier, the Elantra is fairly smooth to drive, this petrol automatic model. It's a very calm experience in this car because the powertrain is fairly quiet, and no matter what drive mode you are in, throttle response is always adequate. For example, when you're driving an Eco, you're not going to be going full throttle. So in that sense, when you're driving with a light foot, it's fairly comfortable. But of course, if you need more power, you can go into sport mode as well. There is a new drive mode here, it's called Smart. So that cleverly balances your Eco and your sport mode, in the sense that when you're driving with lighter throttle input, it goes into Eco mode. The moment you step on it, it goes into sport mode, so you get more instantaneous power delivery. Now because this is a 2-liter petrol engine, there's always enough grunt. But you know what? Typical of a petrol engine, you truly start enjoying this car when you step on it and when you go faster, because your peak torque is made at 4,000 RPM, but your peak power is made at a heady 6,200 RPM. And this engine likes to rev, it has no complaints whatsoever. So if I step on it, it just goes like that. So in the city, the Elantra is always very nice to drive, The transmission is fairly clever in the sense that it always holds the correct gears, and kick down acceleration in sport mode isn't all that bad. So the Elantra can also be a fair amount of fun to drive if you're out on the highway driving faster, so it's got the performance for that as well. And in the city, well, it's just a very quiet and comfortable commuter. Now, between the engine and the gearbox, both of them are very competent units, but I have to say that the gearbox especially feels very nice. It goes through the gears so smoothly and so quietly and comfortably that you really can't complain with this transmission. It's only when you suddenly demand power, even in sport mode. Of course, there's a typical torque converter amount of delay, but it isn't too much at all. And once you get the power, then you can keep going. In sport mode, the engine holds the revs correctly, and it's always good fun to drive this car around. Now, as far as ride comfort is concerned, the Elantra has a very well balanced suspension setup. It feels firm, but when you're going over bumps and the like, it's not uncomfortable at all. It's not too noisy either. So overall, it's a very comfortable car to drive. Now, in terms of drive dynamics and handling, well, the steering is a bit numb and it feels fairly vague at times. But that's because this car has been set up for all-round comfort. So the light steering setup is what adds to the comfort quotient when you're just cruising around town and you're driving around our tight Indian roads. So in that sense, this car is one that has been set up with all-round comfort in mind. Having said that, I have to say that high-speed stability isn't too bad. In fact, the car stays fairly planted on expressways at faster speeds. So the updated Elantra continues to be a very compelling package for the D-segment sedan buyer. It has a spacious cabin, it's got a comfortable ride, it comes packed with equipment, it has a rather potent 2-liter petrol engine, and you can have it with the choice of either a 6-speed manual gearbox or the 6-speed automatic gearbox, which itself is fairly nice. Interestingly, Hyundai has dropped the diesel model with this facelift, so all you have is this petrol engine, and I'm not really complaining because it's a fairly good one. As for the biggest change here in terms of styling, well, the interior styling works really well for itself with the revised interiors and the dual tone color theme. On the outside, you get a new bonnet with a mild power dome. You get very angular lines up front for the grille, for the headlamps, for the indicator lamps below. So there's a lot of lines going on. It's a similar story at the back. I personally prefer the more sedate styling of the previous model, but hey, like I said, this one gets all the eyeballs, and that's what it amounts to ultimately. And lastly, let's not forget that the drive dynamics of a sedan any day trump those of an SUV. So the Elantra rides fairly high up, and it's a fairly practical everyday driver. And on that account, I have to say that the Elantra is a very practical car as well. It's got a very decent amount of ground clearance, and you can drive this car in the city as well as go on your road trips because it's got a big boot as well. So if you're on the market for a 20 lakh rupee car and you enjoy driving, well, the Elantra is a car that you can definitely take a look at.